Hello, everyone. Welcome. For those of you who don't know me, welcome. Hi, my name is Donniel Hartman. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here. And to give you a bracha at the beginning. That our learning here together should be meaningful, should be challenging, should be honest, that you have an opportunity. Learning is not about learning only new ideas. It's about a chance to look at yourself, to think about your life. Our tradition teaches that great is learning, for it leads to practice. That this week should be a week where you could just let yourselves be, and that it should be safe enough for you to let yourself be. When a person doesn't feel respected or safe, they shut down. And then we only let those ideas that already agree and resonate with everything that we've known beforehand to find a place. If that's the case, we'll have wasted our week. And so thank you for choosing us as a place which hopefully could be worthy of being your Beit Midrash. And we should have a good week together. The theme we picked is not a simple one. We're living in a time, or maybe all times are like that, but we are also living in a time where common decency is not always that common. In some cases, it seems that we assume that there's a common decency, but in fact, we haven't really done the work. And that common decency is not really that prevalent. And that there's a very large gap between what comes out of our mouth at some times and what comes out of our mouth at others. And we haven't yet made clear or created a clear commitment to a standard of practice that has to become common. This is the case as represented by the Me Too movement, where it turns out that too many people happen to think they're in a locker and have difficulty distinguishing where the locker is and where it shouldn't be. And we'll get to the locker also. In some cases, it's not that we don't know what common decency is. And by the way, we're also living in a time where it's shifting. Because throughout humanity, there was never a real significant challenge about knowing the good. The real significant challenge was who you apply it to. You apply it to yourself, that is for sure. But who else do you apply it to? Do you apply it to all men or only men of your religion or your race? Do you apply it to women? Do you apply it to people of other national identities? Do you apply it to people of other sexual identities? The application of common decency. We're at a time where our recognition that its expansion or its parameters need to be expanded, but we're in this very difficult time where we're trying to set a new common law. In some cases, it is common. And we know exactly how it should be applied. But the problem is, it seems to be increasingly So easy to set it aside. Doesn't take that much. Just a little bit of fear. Just a little bit of sense that maybe if my common decency will take something from me, maybe it's not that important. I just want to make America great. Or, don't you really love the Jews? Don't you care about your family first? It's just so easy. It's not that you don't know. But the ease with which a little bit of fear or a little bit of aspiration or a little bit of sense that somehow you haven't had your fair share and somehow there's something that you need could very often alter your priorities. And then your common decency could become less common. In political discourse, where it wasn't always sure that decency was even a value, seems to be reaching new heights or lows. Not merely in the way we talk about each other, but in the way we hear each other, the way we interpret each other. One of the central rules, as I spoke to our board today in philosophy, is that when you encounter a counter-argument, you always are supposed to give it its best reading. Its best argument. Do we do that in our color-coded political lives? It's very easy to win a political debate when you both determine your argument and the sensibility of the other, and you don't hear. What is common decency in our political discourse? In social media. We now have friends we never see. But we also allow ourselves to have enemies. I don't only friend and befriend, but I'm able to say things, and sometimes I read some of the talkbacks. I write something or other people's write something. It's an idea. No one claimed that your ideas are messianic. Sometimes I listen and I love reading the talkbacks. And people say, oh, don't. No, I do. Maybe it's a little bit of masochism. Masochism, though, is good for your soul a little bit. And you wonder, some people have a face there and some people don't, but it's never really big enough to see. And you wonder, in their discourse with others in the street, would they ever say such a thing to somebody? You're a stupid fool who has never understood anything and you are a curse on the... Is that sort of... I don't know. I've been doing this for quite a while, and I must confess, Facebook is still not a medium that I've ever been on. But I'm quite sure that at least I haven't encountered this very often as I lecture around the world, and there's a lot of people who don't like me. But what are the rules of common decency in brand new mediums that we don't know, that we haven't yet even set forth what the standards are? Do the words, do they mean the same thing? Maybe they don't even mean the same thing. Maybe when you call someone a stupid idiot, fool, creep, who I hate, I just mean that, you're someone who I'd like to challenge you to rethink some of your positions. Maybe that's what the words mean. Maybe, but what does common decency mean in these mediums? We are living, at least, at a time where we have greater and greater aspirations. We speak about ourselves in living in greater and greater enlightened times. But the reason for our choosing our theme this summer was a feeling of increased angst and discomfort and wonderment. Is our world, are we in fact as enlightened as we seem? And what work do we need to do? Now, this week, I want to be really clear, is not about others. If you keep this week as a week in which you articulate all the failures of others, that's not our way. It's an opportunity to think about ourselves. This is not going to be a week in which we put Donald Trump on trial, or Bibi Netanyahu, or the Haredim, or this or that government. Please, please, leave that outside. That's not the work. You can't do tshuva for somebody else, nor is it appropriate. The spirit of this week is the spirit of the way Kol Nidre begins, according to the Sephardic tradition. Kol Nidre begins with a beautiful haunting tune. B'yeshiva shel mala u'b'yeshiva shel mata al da'at hamakom baruch hu v'al da'at hakahal hakadosh hazeh anu matirim lehitpalel im ha'avaryanim. In the assembly of high and in the assembly down below, on the authority of God and on the authority of this holy community, we permit praying together as sinners. It's about how I could be just one step better. And so let's also, as we talk about Derech Eretz, common decency, talk about common decency in a decent manner. And that will make all the difference in the world. Let's begin. Hi, everyone. I apologize for becoming intense right away. It's just sort of who I became. I become kind of intense. You all have this? I'm intense because I want to grow. I'm not here teaching. I want to live in a place, in an institution. I want to find the pockets where I could take a step forward. And I hope you want to do the same. Now, for the term common decency, our tradition, or for the category of common decency, our tradition has a term. That term is called Derech Eretz. Just by a show of hands. And don't worry if your hand doesn't go up. Before registering for this summer, who heard of the category Derech Eretz? Oh, okay, so now that's why you're the ones who showed up this summer. We found all of those who heard the category. Welcome, the fellows who heard. Derech Eretz literally means, what does the term literally mean, Derech Eretz? It's not an English term like tikkun olam. It actually there's a meaning to the term. Derech means the way. Eretz means the land. It literally means the way of the land. Or, if I would stretch it a little bit, by the ways of the land, it's about connecting to some common norms. By the way of the land, it's connecting to that which is common. It's not about laws. Derech Eretz as a category is not a legal category. It's a meta-legal category. It's not about regulating how much tzedakah you should give. It's not about regulating exactly when speech is libelous or not. It's not about determining the fixed and clear parameters of moral behavior. It's about some deeper underlying sense of humanity. It's like what John Welch said to McCarthy. Have you no sense of decency? At long last, have you no sense of decency? It's not about arguing legally. It's about trying to connect to something more primordial, something deeper, which doesn't determine the law, but determines the life of a person who lives within the law. In this opening class of Derech Eretz, I'm not going to put forth as distinct from the rest of the conference various instances in which we want to try to come in touch with what does common decency require? What does common decency require towards people of different gender and different race and in different circumstances and politics and public discourse, et cetera, et cetera? What's the common decency between a family, some of whom live in America and Canada and some live in Israel? It's not about, my class today is not about the particulars. What I want to do is to try to introduce the category and to try to see how our tradition understood it in a meta level. What is it that they were trying to set forth? To do so, and in doing research for this summer, I studied all the instances in which the term appears in rabbinic sources. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a journey with you in how the term evolves. But I'm not doing so because I want to point to the historical evolution of the category. But when you look at the different features of Derech Eretz, you come to understand how we're trying to get you to think about it. And ultimately, how we try to enable it to be a powerful and important category, to the extent that our rabbinic tradition says, Derech Eretz kadma Torah, Derech Eretz must precede Torah. How we get there is a fascinating and critical journey, and hopefully one that could enable us in our own space and in our own environments to elevate this discourse and to elevate the decency within which, in the environment within which we live. Let's begin. The beginning of the category, in its earliest, not necessarily historical sense, but in its earliest conceptual sense. Derech Eretz literally means the way of the Am Haaretz. Derech Eretz means, and Am Haaretz is what? Who's the Am Haaretz? It's common people, but who's the Am Haaretz? The ignorant, ignoramus one. The Am Haaretz is the lowlife. The Am Haaretz is not part of the elite. The Am Haaretz is the one who's not Jewishly sensitive. The Am Haaretz is the one who doesn't really care about. The Am Haaretz is the mediocre Jew. Now, unfortunately for the rabbis, the mediocre Jew was what? Common. The mediocre Jew was the common folk, literally the people who live on the land. The discourse begins, actually, with a very radical rabbinic statement in the Ethics of the Fathers. This is a Tanaic source, so therefore it's early. It's somewhere post-destruction. And after the year 70 AD, between 70 to somewhere in the vicinity of 150 or so. It's a very early Jewish source. And the rabbis, in chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot, say as follows. Now, again, we're just going to dive right in. Welcome to the Hartman Institute, okay? Everybody feeling okay? You had something to drink and eat? We're ready to go to work, okay? Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, would say, beautiful is the study of Torah with Derech Eretz, for the toil of them both causes sin to be forgotten. ultimately all Torah study that is not accompanied with Derech Eretz is destined to cease and to cause sin. In the early rabbinic tradition, there was a profound debate. Who is the ideal Jew? And the rabbis came to the opinion that maybe we were the ideal Jew. Maybe we who sit in beautiful Batei Midrash, for whom the world of the Beit Midrash is our world, maybe that's who you should be. And Rabban Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, says, beautiful is the study of Torah when it is accompanied by Derech Eretz. Basically saying to the rabbis, I want you to spend half of your life being a rabbi and half of your life being a Am Haaretz. I want you to do what the Am Haaretz does, and the Derech Eretz here in this early sense was to work. Derech Eretz literally mean to live, to walk the way of the land, to work on the land. Just to work. That's all it meant. It was to work. To connect to the requirements of the land. The land makes demands of you. Torah makes demands of time, and the land makes demands of time, and you need to do both, because if you don't, for example, the rabbis were petrified by rabbis who did not work, because if they did not work, they would take payment from people, and then when a rabbi was beholden to somebody, they felt that the rabbi would lose some of their inherent and necessary independence. And maybe you would steal, or maybe you would cheat, and maybe you would take here or there. Who is this Am Haaretz, whom Rabban Gamliel wants us, basically says to the rabbis, I want you to be an Am Haaretz. You have to understand how revolutionary this statement is. Because for the rabbi, it was our whole existence is we are not them, and the Am Haaretz is them. We don't eat in their houses. In a beautiful saying, where one of the rabbis, when he used to come into the Beit Midrash, or when he would leave the Beit Midrash, he would have the following bracha, and he would say as follows. Rabbi Nechunya ben Hakana, this is in chapter 4 of Tractate Brachot. When he leaves the Beit Midrash, where he would study Torah, he would give the following blessing. I give thanks to thee, O Lord my God, that thou hast set my portion with those who sit in the Beit Midrash, and not set my portion with those who sit on street corners. Who are those who sit on street corners? The Am Haaretz. For I rise early and they rise early. I rise early for words of Torah. They rise early for frivolous talk. I labor and they labor. I labor and receive a reward, and they labor and do not receive a reward. I run and they run. But I run to the life of the future world, and they run to a pit of destruction. And along comes Rabban Gamliel and says, rabbis, your Torah is better if you're also an Am Haaretz. I want you to connect to the world. I don't want you to be separate from the world. And the world is it's not an intellectual world. I want you to be a part of it. I want you to work. And this was a very debated position. If you go to source, again, in Ethics of the Fathers, source 3.5, Rabbi Nechunya, the son of Hakana, would say, this is the same Rabbi Nechunya would say, one who accepts upon himself the yoke of Torah is exempt from the yoke of government duties and the yoke of Derech Eretz. Torah frees you from it. You have a critical choice to make. Do you want the path of Torah, or do you want the path of the common person? Do you want to be beholden to the land, or do you want to be beholden to God? And he says, if you choose to be beholden to God, you're free. Rabbi Hanina, our rabbis taught, the second paragraph of source 4. It says, and you shall gather in thy corn. The Torah says, gather in your corn. What is to be learned from these words? Why does the Torah tell me, gather in my corn? If I'm a farmer, I'll gather in my corn. I don't need the Torah to give me a rule about gathering in my corn. Because it also says in the Torah, the book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, Because it says in the Torah and another place, Lo yamush sefra Torah zamipicha, that that the study of Torah is never to cease from your lips. I might have thought that this ruling was to be taken literally. Who takes it literally? There are parts of the Jewish world who say, I'm not supposed to be engaged with the world. Torah is my life. Therefore it says, and you shall gather in thy corn, which implies that you are to combine the study of Torah with Derech Eretz. Don't be a yeshiva boy your whole life. The yeshiva is not the world. Earn a living. This is the view, like in everything in our tradition, everything is debated. This is the view of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, is it possible? If a man plows in the plowing season, sows in the sowing season, reaps in the reaping season, threshes in the threshing season, winnows in the season of wind, what is to become of Torah? And this argument, it's not just an argument, the aesthetics, I don't know how to, there's some English word for it, but the experience of reading the words is the argument. You feel the argument just by hearing it. I'm already tired by I went plowing the plow, and then you're going to sow in the sowing season and reap in the reaping season and thresh in the threshing season. And by now we get to winnowing, which I have no idea what it is, but you winnow in something. What's to become of Torah? The claim of the land is going to take over your life. You want me to winnow and gather in I can't do the two. So how am I supposed to live in this world? The solution is simple. How? God provides. But God doesn't provide manna from heaven. God provides people who choose not to live in the Beit Midrash. No, but when Israel performed the will of the omnipresent, their work is performed by others. As it says, the stranger shall stand and feed your flock. And when Israel do not perform the will of the omnipresent, their work is carried by themselves. As it says, you shall gather in thy corn. And gathering in thy corn is no longer a commandment. It is now a curse and a punishment. Zionism is built on the disdain and rejection of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And to this very day, one of the great challenges of Zionism is, where does Torah come in? How do you combine the two? The journey of Derech Eretz begins. Derech Eretz is what the Haaretz does to sustain life in a non-miraculous existence. It's all the rest of us who have to get up in the morning and make a living and can't count on either somebody else to fund my existence or somebody else to take care of me, or, the famous joke about the father-in-law who was the future father-in-law who fell in love with his, this maybe only the rabbis know this joke. I have no idea. But if you don't, yeshiva life's really exciting. So I'll share with you one of the real, a yeshiva joke where a father's sitting there and his daughter comes in and brings a boy and the father asks the son, it's so nice that you're going out with me. I just want to get a little know more about you. What's your plans for making a living? He said, God will provide. Now, are you studying? God will provide. Do you have a job? God will provide. And the father runs into the kitchen and says to his wife, she brought home the best person in the world. She's unbelievable. What's so great about him? Keeps on calling me God. It's like, wow, this is the beginning of a good relationship. But if you don't want God to provide, here, Derech Eretz puts forth and says, are we claimed by the land? Are we claimed by it? Does it obligate us just as much as Torah obligates us? From this begins the journey of Derech Eretz. From the practices of the person living on the land. On page 5, we move to the next stage of Derech Eretz, which is no longer the work of the common man or woman. It now goes to common sense. The Torah taught us Derech Eretz. A man should not put all his money in one hiding place. The Torah taught us Derech Eretz. If a man builds a ship which is to stand upright, he must make its breadth 1/6 of its length and its height 1/10 of its length. You want to keep your money safe? You have cash? Invest it in multiple places. Don't put it on one stock. You want a ship that doesn't tilt? Is that the word? Tilt or do something, kneel over, whatever it is. Do something, kneel over, thank you. That doesn't do something over? Keel over. I knew I was close. There was keel, there was kneel, anyway, it was close enough. It's been a long week already. But at any rate, it doesn't keel over. There has to be a certain ratio between the height, the width, not that I know from it, but these are the metrics that the Torah tells us about the Ark of Noah. So why does the Torah teach us the size of the Ark of Noah? The Torah is teaching you common sense. Now, what does it mean the Torah is teaching you common sense? Is the Torah the source of the common sense? It's interesting for some who are so far away from the Haratz, their whole life is in the Beit Midrash, they actually think the Torah is the source of common sense. I have no common sense. All I have is whatever the Torah teaches. Torah's not, it's teaching you common sense, but if you don't study Torah, you won't have common sense. You won't know how to, actually I could live in yeshiva and believe that the only ones who know how to build a boat are the yeshiva boys who don't know how to, the problem is they never saw a hammer. But other than that, they're the only ones who know how to build a boat. I know how to build a boat. How do I know how to build a boat? Because the Torah taught me common sense. While that is, in theory, coherent, I think it is a nonsensible reading of the text. The Torah is not the source of common sense. What they're teaching you is the Torah is embracing common sense. And here, living in the land, living in the world requires practical knowledge. And what the rabbis are saying is that we're not setting up a dichotomy between Torah, law, revelation, God, or whatever it might be, and common sense, but that it all has to be a part of your Torah. If you live in the world, you have to learn what it means to live in that world, and you have to acquire the knowledge, the common sense that it requires. Torah embraces it. Torah advocates for it. Torah is not the source of common knowledge or common sense, but Torah has to represent it. From common sense, the journey of Derech Eretz proceeds to common courtesy. The Torah taught us Derech Eretz. Don't stay as a guest with your relatives for more than a month. You see, what's the definition of home? You all know who, I forget who, but you know that the definition of home, I'm blanking on who said it. Robert Frost. Home is the place where if you need to go there, they have to let you in. Now, that in theory is correct. But there's boundaries. They have to let you in, but for how long? Like at what moment do you actually have other plans? Now, one of the problems is they can't kick you out. And therefore, what does Derech Eretz require? That you leave. That at some point you get embarrassed. Or, the Torah taught us, I love this one, the Torah taught us Derech Eretz, that a person who travels to a foreign country and has his own provisions should not eat from them, but should rather leave them and buy from the local shopkeepers. Isn't that a beautiful one? I'm traveling, and on the way, I have to buy a $13 cup of coffee. Why? I'll put it in a thermos. It costs me 5 cents. I'll mix it. I'll be my own. Life's going to be good. I make my own sandwich. I like my tuna fish. It's all there, and I'm ready for my journey, and I'm unpacking my tuna fishes and whatever it might be. But when you're traveling, there's a whole world of people who make a living from the traveler. And at the end of the day, how much of a profit? Who's losing how much? Each person who's traveling is only going to lose $5, but when 100 people are willing to lose it, another person can make a living for their family. What is this common courtesy? Derech Eretz starts with living on the land. Common sense is learning what living on the land teaches you. Common sense. If you want your ship to float, build it in a certain way. But now the Derech Eretz, it's not so much living in the land, but it's living with people who are living in the land. As Levinas teaches us, to see somebody is to be obligated. When I see you, if I truly see you, when I don't see you, I can, he doesn't or she doesn't care. But to see somebody is to see somebody with wishes and desires. And the minute I truly see you is to understand I'm obligated by you. But it's not, in this case, great moral obligations. It's a sense that to be a human being, to be a Mensch, is to live with sensitivity, to live with politeness, to be polite, to be courteous, to realize that the world in which you live is inhabited by people who are not just simply you, and it's to look into the horizon and not merely to see your own belly button, but to actually look into the horizon and see somebody and to try to figure out, who are they? What do they need? So I know I'm in my family's house, and they can't tell me when to leave. But when do I know to leave? It is this journey from common practice, the practice of the commoner, to common sense, to common decency, that leads us to the final stage of Derech Eretz, which is not common courtesy, but common decency. And let's read the case and why this journey is so critical to understand how our tradition is trying to teach you this category. Rabbi Yanai, everybody with me on page 7? Rabbi Yanai was once walking on the road, and he saw a man of exceeding effusiveness who said to him, "Would you, Rabbi, care to accept my hospitality?" They say, "Rabbi, please invite me to your home. Could I please come eat in your house?" Rav Yanai answered, "Yes." Whereupon he brought him to his house and entertained him with food and drink, as you would. He understood. That seems to be what the person seemed to need a meal. And then something interesting happens in the house. The house gets turned into a Beit Midrash. A Beit, a home, becomes a house of study. And when a home becomes a house of study, something fundamentally wrong begins to happen. He tested him in his knowledge of Talmud. That he wanted, who is this? What do you know about? And Talmud is the hardest thing. Tested him in Talmud, found that he possessed none. Agadah, which is a little easier, it's not the law, it's the stories of the Talmud, found that he had none. Mishnah, which is just the most basic stage of Jewish law, and found that he had none. Well, then at least he must have some scripture, which is the lowest thing, and he found that he had none. So here's a person who comes for a meal. He's coming into Rabbi Yanai's home and doesn't know that Rabbi Yanai wants to know, could I have a Beit Midrash with you? Could I have a home of study? Instead of a home of basic, simple human interaction. He then said to him, "Take up a wine cup and recite grace." Now you have to know that anybody who grows up in an observant family, somewhere by the age of 8, knows all Jewish law that they have to know. Rabbis have to sometimes answer the fine-tuned issues. But somewhere around the age of 8 or 9, you know all the blessings, you know what to say. It's just the common practice of your home, and Jewish law really is not that complicated. So asking him just to say the blessing over wine, that would be simple. He answered, let Yanai recite grace in his own house. Basically saying, he's feigning, now he's embarrassed because he doesn't even know this. He says, Yanai, you bless. Basically, who is this person? He is a what? He is the Haratz, Rabbi Yanai's enemy. So Rabbi Yanai then says to him, are you able to repeat what I say to you? And the man says, yes. So he says, repeat the following. And the man thinks he's about to repeat the blessing. And what does Yanai say? Repeat after me. Say, a dog has eaten of Yanai's bread. You are a dog. Now at this point, we don't know who's right. When the rabbis get together, that dog who came to my house. And who's writing this book? Not the dog. History is always recorded by the victor. So here the victor is writing the book. Rav Yanai and his colleagues, they're the ones who are writing the book, and then they add a remarkable continuation of the story. The man rose and caught hold of Yanai and said to him, you have my inheritance, which you are withholding from me. There's this crazy guy in my house now. He's in my house. I can't lie. He's claiming that I stole something from him? Is he going to start taking, I don't know. And if he, by the way, is an Haratz and I sat in the Beit Midrash all the time, chances are that what? He's stronger than me. And now you have somebody stronger than you in your house. And is this a crazy guy going to start claiming that China comes from somehow his mother was related to my uncle and this, and somehow I took? He's going to steal and rob from me. What's going on here? What is this Haratz going to claim? Said Rabbi Yanai, what is this inheritance of yours which I have? I don't know what you're talking about. Leave me alone. Get out of my house. I'm going to call the police. The man answered, once I passed behind a school, and I heard the voice of youngsters saying, the law which Moses commanded us is the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. And he says to Yanai, it's not written that the Torah is the inheritance of the congregation of Yanai. It is written that the Torah is the inheritance of all the Jewish people, of the congregation of Jacob. And now it turns out, look at the story. This person who wanted to come into Yanai's house, what did he want? He actually wanted a home that would also be a Beit Midrash. It turns out that what he wanted from Yanai is for Yanai not to test him in his knowledge, but to actually teach me something. He could have gone to a lot of people, and he goes to Yanai and says, when he asks, could I come into your home? Could you give me some of my inheritance that I know nothing of, but I know I heard? I walked behind and I have no idea. I'm probably illiterate, but I heard the little kid saying, I have an inheritance, which is a Torah. You know it. Could you please teach me? But Yanai didn't see it. Yanai wanted to know whether this person was worthy, whether this person was on par, whether this person could give to Yanai something. Because if I'm going to talk to you in Torah, I'm going to benefit from it. And then comes the following sentences. Said Yanai to this man, how have you merited to eat at a table with me? Again, look at, Yanai he wanted to know what he was going to get out of it, and now he wants to know, how is it that you got to come into my house? How is it that I'm a Aretz in some universe was blessed with the opportunity of breaking bread with me? The man answered, never in my life have I, after hearing evil talk, repeated it to the person spoken of. Don't we love, we don't speak Lashon Hara. We just repeat Lashon Hara. Wasn't me. And I'm not going to repeat it in general. I'm going to repeat it to the person who it was spoken about. You know why? Because I care about you. Because I want to tell you who your enemies are. I want to share the good news that, you know what somebody said about your lecture? Do you know what someone said about you? Oh, and then it's here. It's Lashon Hara, which serves to bond you with them because you're protecting them and sharing with them, and now you have a common enemy. He says, I never, ever shared Lashon Hara about the person who it was spoken to. By the way, this text is a reason to be Jewish, isn't it? It's like, it's an honor to be part. It's just I just get excited every time I read it again and again and again. It's just beautiful. Nor have I ever seen two persons quarreling without making peace between them. Said Rabbi Yanai, that I should have called you a dog when you possess such Derech Eretz. And from here, the only time it appears, the statement comes, for Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman said, Derech Eretz, the duty of Derech Eretz, precedes Torah by 26 generations. Torah is given at Sinai, and the 70 chapters or so of the Bible before Sinai are the chapters of a different Torah. It's not the Torah of Revelation. It's the Torah of Derech Eretz. And now, it's about decency. And what's so remarkable, you are a decent man. And now Yanai sees him and says, you are, in one sense, in my other categories, in the category of the Torah of Revelation, you're a dog. But who is the dog? Yanai. Yanai calls him a dog, but Rav Yanai's colleagues and Rav Yanai himself tell the story that the person who was flawed was Yanai, not this person, because this person was an exemplar of decency. And he didn't learn it from books. He didn't learn it disconnected from life. He learned it, he is completely illiterate. But he sees people's faces. And he feels morally obligated, not just to be polite, but to spread good and kindness in the world. And the rabbis then introduced the notion that Derech Eretz has to precede Torah. And when they say that Derech Eretz precedes Torah, they're not making a historical claim that Derech Eretz in fact preceded Torah. They're making a prescriptive claim that Derech Eretz must precede Torah. Because when Derech Eretz does not precede Torah, what do you get? Rabbi Yanai. And they say something could go wrong with us, where we don't see and we don't hear and we don't appreciate. The one who expresses this, again, most powerfully, in a text that we never let you come to the Hartman Institute for more than 2 years without reading, and it just doesn't matter, and it's just one of my best friends, so I'm going to share it with you again, and I hope this text is one of your best friends. Shimon ben Shetach, the early rabbi who lives before the Common Era, traded in cotton. What was he? He did Torah with Derech Eretz. He trades in cotton. His students said to him, Master, allow us to buy you a donkey so that you won't have to labor so much. Rabbi, let's free you from Derech Eretz. You'll be able to spend more time in Torah if I buy you a donkey. I don't need you. The whole thing will go much quicker. Because what we want from you is we want to learn Torah from you. And we have to, when you're out taking cotton, Derech Eretz, when you're winnowing, when the winnowing, and planting, when the planting, and sowing, when the sowing, and I know the order is backwards, but that's as much as I know about these things. But whatever it is, there's just not that much time for Torah. So let me buy you a donkey. They went and bought him a donkey from a certain Syriac, who was an idolater, and found upon it a precious stone, they came and told him, you never have to labor again, free at last, free at last. Now, my Lord, I'm free at last. This is an example of those who commit themselves to Torah. What are they going to be free from? Derech Eretz. What the rabbis taught comes true. God, in fact, provides for those who commit themselves to the work of Torah. Said he, why so? Why am I free of Derech Eretz? They replied, we bought you a donkey from a certain Syriac and found upon it a precious stone. He said, does the owner know of it? No. He told them, go and return it. Shimon ben Shetach's students don't know that Derech Eretz comes before Torah. They don't only know that Derech Eretz, literally, the working of the land, comes before Torah. But they don't know that your common decency and your moral conscience has to come before Torah. And their love of Torah makes them forget. What about this? Now all of a sudden this Syrian, he's a dog. He's there to serve me. What about his needs? What about what's fair for him? They're not even aware of it because all they have is Torah. They don't have a Derech Eretz which comes before Torah. The Gemara then continues in a later attempt to understand this text and says, but did not Rav Huna Bibi ben Gazlan say, quoting Rav, it's a state in the presence of Rabbi Yehuda the Nasi, the prince, even according to the view that stealing from a heathen is forbidden, appropriating his lost property is permitted. Nobody who has Derech Eretz would even write this sentence. You read this sentence and you break out in a rash. You see somebody sitting in a, you say, legally, I know I'm not allowed to steal. Now there's a debate. According to some, I'm allowed to steal. But even if we are one of those enlightened ones who don't steal, we don't have to return their lost property. If you were an anti-Semitic, there's a potential to becoming. And then the Gemara answers, what do you think? Shimon ben Shetach is a barbarian? Shimon ben Shetach says, I don't care what Jewish law requires me to do. I'm obligated by common decency. What distinguishes the barbarian? What makes me a civilized human being? It is my common decency. And common decency has to come before Torah. Now, in this journey that I portrayed to you up till now, the journey of Derech Eretz is a very, very specific one. They don't want you to develop a term of Derech Eretz as built from the law. They don't want to create a standard of decency which grows out of Torah. It doesn't come from the legal requirements. It's not the sum total of somebody who observes the commandments between one human being and the next who embodies the principle of Derech Eretz. Derech Eretz, through this development, is not the Torah of the Torah, it's the Torah of the Am Haaretz. And just as they want you to work, they want you to connect to a humanity. Now it's true, common decency is not always common, but make it common. It's there. Connect to it. Live with people, live in the land. Let the Torah of the land, let the Torah of reality, let the Torah of seeing people speak to you. Connect to a conscience, to connect to something deeper inside. If you're starting and saying, okay, what should I do in the world? Oh, thank God I have the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not steal. That's too late. Thou shalt not murder. Too late. If you first discover this in Exodus 20, you're never going to be the person we want. You're only going to be able to hear that if you heard the Torah of the first 70 chapters, which was a Torah without Torah. It was a Torah without God, without revelation. It was a Torah built on a fundamental, naive principle of Judaism, that the common man or woman knows the good. They might not know the refined principle of that good. They might not know how to apply it exactly in every single circumstance. But that decency only will exist if you connect to something that's outside of your religious discourse, outside of your legal discourse. And as a part of the journey then of Torah is to connect you back. So when you start with Genesis, we want you to connect not to Adam and Eve. We want you to connect to your own inner journey of connecting to a mind and connecting to a conscience that comes before Torah. And only if you have that will you be worthy of coming to Torah. And when all you have is Torah, then you have a bunch of barbarians who in the name of Torah want to know, do I really have to give it back? They're a guy. I'm allowed to steal from a guy. It's not stealing. I'm just not returning. He made a mistake. He didn't catch me. You could be a barbarian. What they're saying to you is Torah doesn't redeem you from being a barbarian unless you create an educational system and a life and a system of values which enables you to connect to something deeper within your soul. And so, Derech Eretz of decency, which is the Derech of the Haratz, is trying to create within the Jewish world two Torahs. Not the Torah, the written Torah and the oral Torah. Not the New Testament and the Old Testament. But the written Torah and the Torah of humanity. And when that Torah of humanity is learnt and taught and celebrated, there's a chance that it will be common. But there's one last stage that I want to share with you. And that is on page 11, and with that I'll conclude, and if there's any questions or comments. It's page 11 and 14. So I always say that you're coming to an end just so that you could, it's getting there. It's Derech Eretz. And as an ADHD person, I'm always very sensitive to, like for me, it's great that I went into this field because I could lecture. Listening to lectures, torture. But like absolute, and I apologize, for some reason, I just don't know how to speak for less than, it just sort of comes out that way. I press the button, sometimes it stops at an hour to 2 hours. It's not Derech Eretz, but anyway, it's just sort of someone else's fault. Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Azariah, would say, if there is no Torah, there is no Derech Eretz. If there is no Derech Eretz, there is no Torah. Now this is very different from the opinion that Derech Eretz precedes Torah. Because now if there is no Derech Eretz, there is no Torah, I agree. Derech Eretz precedes Torah. You only get to Sinai if you're a Mensch. If you're not a Mensch, if you didn't learn to be a Mensch, first, Sinai will be wasted on you. And you'll be a barbarian. That I heard. But what's the notion, if there is no Torah, there is no Derech Eretz? That's not true. If Derech Eretz precedes Torah, then how could you say that you need Torah for Derech Eretz? Here, instead of seeing a complementary relationship, or even a dichotomy historically in your development between Derech Eretz and Torah, there is another way to reclaim our understanding of Torah. In many ways, is supposed to define when Judaism works, how it can create the best of us. So what does it mean that Torah is necessary for Derech Eretz? Do I need Torah to teach me to be a Mensch? I don't need Torah to teach. I don't need revelation to teach me to be a Mensch. Believing people don't have a monopoly on on menschlichkeitness and decency. So what do you mean? Let's turn to Aristotle on page 14. In his Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle states as follows. Virtue, virtuous behavior. Virtue, the behavior which reflects who you ought to be, or the higher sense of who you are, is of two kinds. There's intellectual and moral. Part of being a human being is also to have intellectual virtues. And the more you embody those intellectual virtues, the more you are a human being and distance yourself from an animal. But these intellectual and moral are very different. Intellectual virtue, in the main, owes both its birth and its growth to teaching. If I want to be someone who knows, I have to be a vessel capable of learning, for which reason it requires experience and time. I have to be taught. Someone has to tell me. Someone has to guide me. Moral virtue, however, doesn't come as a result of being taught. It comes as a result of habit. It comes as a result of practice. Whence also its name, ethika, is one that is formed by a slight variation from the word ethos, habit. From this it is also plain that none of the moral virtues arises in us by nature. None of us are required by nature and forced by our nature to be decent. For instance, for nothing that exists by nature can form a habit contrary to its nature. If being kind and decent was nature, we could never act counter to that. For instance, the stone which by nature moves downwards cannot be habituated to move upwards, no matter how many times you train it. Not even if one tries to train it by throwing it up 10,000 times, nor can fire be habituated to move downwards. Nor can anything else that by nature behaves in one way be trained to behave in another. Neither by nature then, nor contrary to nature, do the virtues arise in us. Rather, we are adapted by nature to receive them and are made perfect by habit. The human being has the potential for decency. It's not in our nature. We have the ability to know. We have the ability to behave. But if we're going to actualize that ability, we need to do so through practice. Again, of all things that come to us by nature, we first acquire the potentiality and later exhibit the activity. Skip the brackets. But the virtues we get first by exercising them, as also happens in the case of the arts. For the things we have to learn, for these are the things we have to learn before we can do them, we learn by doing them. Men become builders by builders, and lyre players by playing the lyre, if that's the way it's pronunciated. So too we become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, brave by doing brave acts. Thus, in a world, states of character arise out of like activities. This is why the activities we exhibit must be of a certain kind. It is because the states of character correspond to the differences between these. It makes no small difference, Aristotle says then, whether we form habits of one kind or another from our youth. It makes great difference, or rather all the difference. If you get used to habituating virtuous practice, you become a virtuous human being. It's when you regulate a certain behavior, not when you think about in theory. So what Aristotle's basically saying, how do we have a virtuous in the realm of the moral? Not in the Beit Midrash. It can't grow out of, in the Beit Midrash you acquire knowledge of Talmud, you acquire knowledge of math and sciences. The only way you become a moral human being is not by talking about it, but by doing it. This principle is turned into a very famous notion in the Jewish tradition, put forth by a man, some claim they don't know his name, who writes a book in the Middle Ages to his son to explain all the commandments of Judaism. And he says as follows: there's this crazy little law, which I'm sure keeps all of you up at night, and I'm sure this is a major part of your Passover celebration. not to break a bone on any one of the bones of the Passover offering. It's, of the 613, way up there. I'm not a bone. Are you a bone breaker? You're Reform. You're a bone breaker. I'm not a bone breaker. I'm Orthodox. We don't break the bones. The fact I don't have a Passover offering is just a minor detail, but I don't break the bones. Now, what's the big deal? What's the Torah telling me not to break bones? You don't have anything to do in your life? Come on. This is serious? Who gives a bleep about breaking bones? Isn't Judaism about the big things? At the root of the precept, he says, lies the purpose to have us remember the miracles of Egypt. As we've written, this is also a branch or a branch correlate of the above root purpose, to remember. For it is not a way of honor, he says, for royal princes and counselors of the land to scrape the bones and break them like dogs. This is fit only for the hungry poor of the people. Therefore, at the beginning of our emergence to become the treasured choice of all the nations, a kingdom of Kohanim and a holy nation, and again every year at the same time, it is fitting for us to perform deeds which reflect the great degree of excellence to which we rose at that hour. Through the action and the symbol that we perform, we set this manner in our souls permanently. And a few paragraphs down, he says his famous line, for after one's acts is the heart drawn. If I want you to think about yourself, if I want you to celebrate your liberation, if I want you to act and feel like a free person, what do I have you do? If I want you to feel like you're a free person, I have to have you behave like a free person. Do all of you know the pillow that you're supposed to lean on? When you eat, I want you to behave in a certain way. When you behave that way and you regulate that behavior, you'll begin to think about yourselves differently. Behavior does not reflect your thoughts. It shapes your character. Great is Torah, for it leads to Derech Eretz, is a certain way of positioning our religious tradition. It doesn't reduce Judaism to the ethical. It doesn't say that all you have to do is be a Mensch. There's lots of parts of what create a virtuous human being. Your spiritual world, your intellectual world, your moral world, they're all there. But part of what, there is a vision that Torah has a role to play in Derech Eretz. It can undermine Derech Eretz if you're like Rabbi Yanai. Torah can undermine Derech Eretz when you think that to be a good Jew is just to live in some disconnected world, is to live in a world of the pure laws. But behavior, Shabbat, what happens when for 25 days I don't touch money? As Heschel says, for 25 days, did I say? I mean, sometimes. Now in the summer it feels that way. For 25 hours I don't touch money. I practice what Heschel teaches, that to have more doesn't mean to be more. So for 25 hours, that which I have come to worship, I free myself of, and through my practice. I practice it, and by practicing it every week, I regulate and train my soul. By sitting down with my family for 4 hours, 3-hour meals, I practice what it means to recognize that in family life, there is no such thing as quality time. There's only quantity time. When every morning, afternoon and evening, I pound and say, Slach lanu avinu ki chatanu. I put in my ritual and say, please forgive me for I have sinned. I regulate in my practice, not a notion of guilt, but a notion that as a human being, by definition, I could be more than who I am. And that as a human being, if I ever embody my values completely, there's probably something wrong with my values. That to be a human being is to aspire for more, to aspire to be better. And that any human being who doesn't have to say Slach Lanu is an idol worshiper. They're worshiping their self. Torah can be a tool for disconnecting you from Derech Eretz. Torah can also be a tool that creates regular practice. Not the regular practice of making a big deal about a breaking of a bone, or a big deal always about what you eat. But it could be a vehicle for challenging you and habituating a certain type of human being. Now, this is a very high standard for Torah. In many ways, it was much easier when we say Derech Eretz precedes Torah. Tells you have to have two. You have to have a tradition with all of its rituals and customs, and they're sweet and they're quaint and they're nice. And that's one part of your life. And there's another part of your life where you have your decency and and Torah teaches it they have to become somehow one, but you know fully well that sometimes they compete with each other. Part of that competition is what led me to write my book, Putting God Second, How to Save Religion from Itself. But this is not about God. But here, Judaism is put forth, and it's Judaism, it's Christianity, it's Islam, it's any ism is put forth and asks the question, within your system, do you habituate moral practice? A religion which habituates moral practice creates a life of value. And it is only that which creates a life of value which is and is worthy of being of value. And our challenge, as we embrace on this week, as we think not about the sins of the others, but about ourselves. So often, there's something so antinomian about us, and so anti-halachic about us. I don't need rules. I'm good. I'm great. I don't need. Derech Eretz says the principle that do you have a Torah which habituates your Derech Eretz? If you are, and you come from a surrounding and an environment which has been disrespectful towards women on an ongoing basis, don't think that you're immune. Don't think that it's just, nothing has rubbed off on you. You're an idolater. Think about what is the practice that you have to commit yourself doing. Oh, it's nothing, it's just work. No. What is the practice that you have to commit yourself to doing? To think that, we could return to power. And of course, Jews, look at all of our suffering. We were slaves in the land of Egypt. Nobody, look, we were the inheritors of the sufferers of it. We're always going to be great. No one's going to teach us ethics. We're safe. What's the Torah of a checkpoint? What's the behavior? How do you, and you should know one of the reasons why our army, and I do believe that our army in Israel is one of the leading forces for moral discourse, is that it habituates the way you use your weapon. It doesn't philosophize, it doesn't engage always in great moral discourse about, it says, you don't use your weapon other than in self-defense. You don't use your weapon other than in proportion to the danger that you face. And I train you day in and day out. And that's why it was so self-evident to the army that Sergeant Azaria should be put on trial. And who is the next Sergeant Azaria? It's not many. You habituate it. How do we habituate the way we talk about the person who disagrees with us? How do we habituate the way we talk about our political adversaries? What are the jokes we tell? Sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never harm me. It's not true. They harm the person and they harm you. What's your culture of discourse? Every one of us. Al data makom val data kahal. Anu mitirim litpalel im avaryanim. Every one of us tolerates practice which habituates us in another direction. Because we have a notion that we are so, that somehow the little things, we're beyond that. We don't need that. Our instincts will guide us. Aristotle says, don't trust your instincts. Aristotle says, don't look for teachers. You know, now get busy. To connect to that and to create a habitual practice which regulates what you act before you even have fully identified with it. That gives us a chance to improve as moral human beings. And so our tradition tells us that there are two Torahs. There are two Torahs. There's the Torah of revelation and there's the Torah of Ha'aretz. Let the Torah of the Ha'aretz claim you before the Torah of God. And then make sure that your Jewish life is a Torah that creates a habituation of the Torah of the Ha'aretz. Don't learn Torah to escape that. Ask how your Torah reinforces it. And when we have that, then maybe in our community, maybe in my own life, maybe in my everyday existence, common decency will be just even a little bit more common. Thank you. Welcome to the subject, and now we have 15 minutes for any questions or comments, please. Anyone? Yes, please, sir.
Quote from chapter 2. I thought that stand up when you're.
I'll repeat the question, I promise.
I thought that the question, the reference to Derech Eretz meant get an occupation.
It did. It means work the land. Derech Eretz is what the Haratz does. They work. They don't sit in the Beit Midrash. They're out in the field gathering in the corn so that the rest of the world could eat. That's what it means. Okay? Yes, please.
How did that translate to men studying in the Beit Midrash and the women working?
How did it translate? See, first of all, women don't have to be in the Beit Midrash because their souls are inherently more pure. Separate but equal. How did it lead to that? Ravi Yanai. Because we let Torah, we let the order of things. Something went wrong. And Zionism in many ways says there was a distortion that happens when you're disconnected from the land, and somehow you get lost. You get lost in this Torah. You forget that Derech Eretz comes before Torah, and you look at yourself and you create, I'm the better, you're the worse, and so that does happen, and it can happen. Part of it grows out of the claim of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. When you plant in the planting season, and harvest in the harvest season, and widow in the widowing season. What's going to happen with Torah? And so your love of Torah, you creates a passion in which you get your life out of balance. Now, often a life out of balance is okay. Life is not supposed to be, even though Aristotle thought that the perfect life was the life in balance. We know that a life of balance is not the best. But it can't be that unbalanced. And then you can sit down and you get lost. And part of the lesson of Derech Eretz is that every one of us could get lost. The Haredim don't have a monopoly on the lost Jews. Every one of us could get lost in certain ways and turn around and say, and at some point you don't even know where you are. And then you need a Shimon ben Shetach and say to you, oh my God, have you no decency, sir? Have you left no decency? Like what? And it's not about, you can't argue the law. Because when you argue the law, they're going to say, but Talmud Torah is important. I have to get you to connect to another part of your being. But that requires a different educational system. Interestingly enough, it is precisely that which led much of the Zionist revolution. And in doing that revolution, they wanted to reclaim the ascendancy of the Am Haaretz. In their revolution against the diasporic Talmid Chacham, they wanted the Am Haaretz, for whom Torah is now the land. And the question of how, as we expand that, we also reconnect to a deeper sense of Derech Eretz, which complements our Jewishness, is the challenge that every one of us has to live with every day. I see 3 hands. Yes, please.
Can you plug your lecture and your categories into the United States of America today, in the following sense, that I feel there's like multiple Am Haaretz. There's the Am Haaretz who lives in blue states and in the coast, who says separating a 3-year-old from his parents is inherently vile. That's unworthy of us. And then there's the Am Haaretz in the red states, in the flag in the heartland, that says, oh no, zero tolerance, we need a stronger current of this. It's the right move. It's the right move. There's a lot of, I was listening to sound discussion on CNN of real people today who approve of this policy. So it depends which Am Haaretz you talk about. Help us think about that.
Now, again, that's part of, thank you for that. As I said, common decency is not always that common. I'll repeat the question. The question was, there are people, let's take the example of whether common decency legitimizes separating children from parents who are breaking American law and being put on trial for trying to penetrate into America illegally. And what are the concepts? What is common decency teaching us? Don't we see some people in some states for whom it's common decency is clear that it's wrong, and in other cases, for others, common decency says it's clearly that it is legitimate. Part of the challenge of our discussion of common decency, as I said from the beginning, is that in our environment now, it's not so clear that we even have a common agreement about this common decency anymore. And part of what happens, I even want to go even more deeply. We live under the myth that constitutions and judiciaries and the rule of law will ensure the decency of our society. And part of the things that we have learned over the last number of years, and maybe it was from the beginning, that it doesn't. And unless you trade that common decency, the common decency which goes beyond the law, before the law, deeper than the law, a common decency that's not judged by who's in which position of power, but that has to reside in the soul of every single sovereign of a state who is the citizen, it's just not going to be, it's not going to emerge. And the assumption that that's going to protect you from your failures, it won't, because part of our challenge today, for all of us, it could be the issue of refugees here in Israel too, where 36,000 people all of a sudden are the greatest danger to the future of Startup Nation. Somehow Startup Nation is in danger by 36,000 people. This is just going to skew the equation. Fear. Fear. A notion that maybe I haven't gotten my share, I need more. My life is not what it should be, and if my life is not what it should be, why is that? Because there's somebody who's taking it from me. And if I would just rectify that, I will be okay again. Common decency requires, as Hillel says, what's hateful unto you, do not do unto others. It requires of you in the position of power to reverse your categories. But it's very hard. And our universe is filled right now, not the third world, the enlightened world. The enlightened world is underperforming in Derech Eretz. And part of what, just by talking about it again, just by putting it to the forefront, I'm trying to create, not for you, for me, a habituation of a certain type of discourse and a certain type of practice. Because it turns out it is not common. Now, it's not, if you would actually dig deeper, it's not that one person says, if you're not American, your life doesn't matter. There are some people who say that. But for the majority of people, even the Nazis were against killing human beings. just who qualified as a human being was a sign of a narrow category. The distinctions between citizens and non-citizens. All human beings are endowed with inalienable rights as long as you're not black or woman. We lived that way for hundreds of years. So what happens is we started to expand, and now all of a sudden we see how easy it is to contract it again. And so part of our discourse is how do we go beyond that? How do we reclaim that? And it's not clear anymore. We're lost because some of we don't do that. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And then how do you feel about that? And how do you move forward? Now, I would posit that some of the red state, blue state discourse is not helpful. Because it creates a language in which one group has the clear higher level of Derech Eretz, while the other one has are the distorted ones. That Derech Eretz exists in all of us, but there's different fears and impediments, and my colleague Yehuda makes a distinction between the moral, the political, and the partisan. What happens when Derech Eretz discourse becomes partisan? One group feels much better, and at the end, the other group is forced to say, I don't care about Derech Eretz. How do we make this something that is how do we make Derech Eretz bipartisan? That doesn't mean we're not always going to agree. Doesn't mean we're always going to agree. It could be that in certain cases, it's really wrong. But it's like if you go back to a certain, was that, what I was just doing was locker talk. Locker talk leads to street behavior. That practice will hopefully reclaim something. Now, I'm not claiming that Derech Eretz is common. I'm claiming that it must be common. And we have to ask ourselves, how do we enable it to be common again? Knowing fully well that in many instances, it's not so simple. It's not self-evidently simple about what you should do. We can't claim anymore, civilized men don't behave that way. Men who vote Democrat don't behave that way. Jews don't behave that way. Americans don't behave that way. We learn that we are. And so our challenge is to do better, knowing fully well that the aspiration to do better would, if we were there already, we wouldn't have had to have this subject. There's something going wrong right now. Something going wrong. And our job is to reflect on it so that we can habituate different practices. And I think some of them involves being less partisan. Being partisan when we need to be partisan, but to being partisan as least often as possible. There were two other hands. There was a hand here and then a hand there. Yes, please. Yes, ma'am.
So my question is about...
I'm going to take all three because we have 4 more minutes and then we'll conclude.
My question is about, if we say there's no Derech Eretz without Torah, what you did with that was take it in the direction of there's no Derech Eretz without a system of practice that develops Derech Eretz. But what about how do we view other religions and how do we view those without religion and the possibility of those people behaving in a way of Derech Eretz?
Thank you.
And does this set us up to view
Got it.
those without religion
Great.
or other religions negatively?
Excellent. 1, 2. Yes, but there were 2 other hands. There was, I don't know anymore. There was, okay, please, I'll just take the questions and then I'll comment together. Yes, please.
So early on when you spoke, you used the term medium Jew. Medium what? Mediocre. I heard you say medium, but okay, mediocre Jew. So I find that extremely judgmental. But at this point in the lecture, I would like to ask you where on the line between the Torah of Derech Eretz and the Torah of Revelation yet told us about how a person would move mediocre to.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I think my point is less controversial. I just thought it was interesting. I went to comment on this. Aristotle would be new science, and you don't need Torah to have Derech Eretz. I guess you don't need analytical stuff to have common knowledge either, but it's very helpful to have that on it. Is that a good analogy? Very helpful to have Torah?
Yes, that could be okay. Good. And fourth, the last one. Yes, please.
Sort of related point. So is the Torah more than just something that allows us to habituate our behavior to bring our innate sense of Derech Eretz reality? Is there something more the Torah gives us than that?
Good. Thank you. One of the reasons for questions, and I feel bad, is because I was literally misunderstood, and you were sitting for a good part of this lecture with a pain in your stomach. I said, in the eyes of the rabbis, the Haratz is the mediocre Jew. I didn't say I was calling them a mediocre Jew. I'm saying that there is this world which juxtaposes the good Jew, the Rabbi Yanais, from the dogs. And that the first text which says Torah should be with Derech Eretz is saying, I want to, this mediocre Jew who the rabbis had set up, who you're supposed to be away from, that person has a Torah we have to learn from. I wasn't at all talking about me. I was explaining the rabbinic version of the dichotomy between the Talmid Chacham and the Am Haaretz. And one way of describing the Am Haaretz in the eyes of the scholar was this person is a mediocre Jew. I was explaining their position. This is the position of the person who says, I work and they work. I work and have a place in the world to come. Their work. So I was using it to describe their tension, which Rabban Gamliel is saying, I want their Torah. And the whole move of Derech Eretz is that this so-called mediocre Jew is somebody who is living on a Torah that you have to hear. Number two, when I use the word Torah, I don't mean Judaism. I read Aristotle. I know Aristotle was a good Jew. But I was reading Aristotle. I'm saying that there's a notion of I was using that the purpose of Torah is to habituate practice. But Aristotle, habituating practice is not only something, it's what religions must do. Now, it's whether you're Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, or whether you have any form of a legal code of behavior. To be a cultured human being is to live within the world of where habituated behavior challenges you to a form of moral behavior. And I did not say that it was essential. I am not saying that the only way to achieve it is through this, but that one of the ways of looking at the legal traditions, whether they are religious or not, the cultural systems, the codes of behavior in which we live, is to habituate practice. So like I have all these habitual things that I make up on my own. So for example, it just bothers me that the most dangerous piece of real estate in Israel is the crosswalk on the street. That's the most dangerous place to be in Israel. So anytime I've created an habituate, no matter how late I am, no matter what, when I'm on a crosswalk and somebody stops, I go like this. I have an habituate. I want them to feel really great about themselves. I want them to feel like they are some hero of the day. You know, it's like, and it's like, that is like, because it's just I don't even think about it anymore. I'm using Torah, and again, remember, just in the largest sense, whether it's Judaism, another religion, whether it's theological, that's not the point. It's about, there is a principle where the Meiri in the medieval says, when you are grounded by the laws, by the rules of religion, it's when you're living in a civilized society. Now, They didn't think that an atheist could be civilized, but we now know you can. But that's what a cultured society does. There's certain things you don't do. Certain things, that's where you create, when decency is common, you will have common decency. That would be a way of forming it. As to the notion of, yes, certain things, they're not necessary, but they're helpful. Now, that helpfulness creates a challenge for Torah. Do you understand Torah? Do you use Torah that way? Because you could waste your Torah. Which comes to the last question. As I said explicitly, I'm not reducing Torah to the ethical. There's multiple. Torah, every Torahs do many things. Every religious system tries to regulate your spiritual life, your intellectual life, your relationship with God. But one of the features that has to shape your Judaism, that has to be present, and if it's not present, there is something deeply, here I will be judgmental, mediocre about your religious tradition. As if your religious tradition doesn't regulate the practice of decency. That if your tradition just allows you to be a barbarian, allows you to ask, the guy, could I steal from him? There's nothing else. So you're great with God and everything is going just fine and your Shabbos is 49 hours. I don't care what you do. But something along the line of your religious tradition needs to be tested by this. This is what Hillel, a reading of Hillel for which we'll end. When someone asks Hillel, teach me all of Torah while I stand on one foot, and he says, what's hateful unto you, don't do unto others, that's the whole Torah, and the rest is commentary. What does it mean that's the whole Torah? Hillel knows it's not the whole Torah. But that is the key through which your Torah is judged. Derech Eretz precedes Torah. Now build a Torah that reinforces the Torah that precedes it. Learn other things, but have a Torah that teaches it. Have a Torah that's tested by it. And let your life be judged and the decency of your tradition be judged and assessed on the basis of what type of behavior it regulates and whether in your community decency is common. When it does, there's something healthy. When there's not, it's time for us to get to work. It was a pleasure being with you again, and welcome.